Olá, seja bem-vindo ao Audiobook da Morgan. Hoje nós temos um convidado especial que lerá o livro para nós. Que livro é esse, Glenn?
É o livro chamado Uts, de um autor inglês, Bruce Chatwin.
Espero que vocês gostem dessa leitura e teremos hoje uma surpresa. A leitura será feita na língua inglesa. Mas antes de começarmos essa leitura, eu vou pedir para você se inscrever no meu canal e ativar o sininho das notificações. Vamos lá?
Agora eu vou ler o primeiro capítulo do livro Uts, escrito no ano 1988, e o autor é Bruce Chatwin. An hour before dawn, on March 7th, 1974, Caspar Joachim Uts died of his second and long-expected stroke in his apartment at number 5 Sirocco Street, overlooking the old Jewish cemetery in Prague. 3 days later, at 7:45 a.m., his friend, Dr. Vaclav Orlik, was standing outside the church of St. Sigismund, awaiting the arrival of the hearse and clutching 7 of the 10 pink carnations he had hoped to afford at the florist's. He noted with approval the first signs of spring. In a garden across the street, jackdaws with twigs in their beaks were wheeling above the lindens, and now and then a minor avalanche would slide from the pantiled roof of a tenement. While Orlik waited, he was approached by a man with a curtain of grey hair that fell below the collar of his raincoat. "Do you play the organ?" the man asked in a catalogue voice. "I fear not," said Orlik. "Nor do I," said the man, and shuffled off down a side street. At 7:57 a.m., the same man unbolted from inside the immense baroque doors of the church. Without a nod to Orlik, he then climbed into the organ loft and, seating himself amid its choir of giltwood and trumpeting angels, began to play a funeral march composed of the 2 sonorous chords he had learned the day before. This from the organist, who was too lazy to stir from his bed at this hour and had found in the janitor a replacement. At 8 a.m., the hearse, a Tatra 603, drew up outside the steps. In order to divert the people's attention from retrograde Christian rituals, the authorities had decreed that all baptisms, weddings, and funerals must be over by 8:30. 3 of the pallbearers got out and helped each other open the rear door. Woods had planned his own funeral with meticulous care. A blanket of white carnations covered the oak coffin, although he had not foreseen the wreath of Bolshevik vulgarity that had been placed on top. Red poinsettias, red gladioli, red satin ribbon, and a frieze of shiny laurel leaves. A card offered condolences to whom? From the director of the Rudolphine Museum and his staff. Orlik added his modest tribute. A second Tatra brought the 3 remaining pallbearers. They had squeezed themselves into the front seat beside the chauffeur, while on the back seat sat a solitary woman in black, her black veil awash with tears. Since none of the men showed any inclinations to help her, she pushed the door open and, shaken with grief, almost fell onto the slushy cobbles. To relieve the pressure and her bunions, the sides of her shoes were slit open. Recognizing her as Utz's faithful servant Marta, Orlik rushed to her assistance, and she, collapsing onto his shoulder, allowed him to escort her. When he attempted to carry her brown leatherette bag, she wrenched it from his grasp. The bearers, employees of a rubber factory who worked night shift and doubled for the undertaker by day, had shouldered the coffin and were advancing up the main aisle. To music that reminded Orlik of the tramp of soldiers on parade. Halfway to the altar, the procession met the cleaning woman, who, with soap, water and scrubbing brush was scrubbing at the blason of the Rosenberg family, inlaid into the floor in many-coloured marbles. The leading bearer asked the woman, most politely, to allow the coffin to pass. She scowled and went on scrubbing. The bearers had no alternative but to take a left turn between two pews, a right turn up the side aisle, and another right to pass the pulpit. Eventually they arrived before the altar, where a youngish priest, his surplice stained with sacramental wine, was anxiously biting his fingernails. They set down the coffin with a show of reverence. Then, attracted by the smell of hot bread from a bakery along the street, they strolled off to get breakfast, leaving Orlick and the faithful martyr as the only mourners. The priest mumbled the service at the speed of a patter number, and from time to time lifted his eyes towards a fresco of the heavenly heights. After commending the dead man's soul, they had to wait at least 10 minutes before the bearers condescended to return at 8:26. At the cemetery, from which the snow had almost melted, the priest, though wrapped in a thick serge overcoat, began to suffer from a fit of shivers. The coffin had hardly been lowered into the earth when he began to shove the mourning martyr by the shoulder blades towards the waiting limousine. He declined Orlick's invitation to breakfast at the Hotel Bristol. At the corner of Jungmanova Street, he shouted for the chauffeur to stop and jumped out, slamming the door. It was Utz who had arranged and paid for this valedictory breakfast. An acrid smell of disinfectant flowed through the dining room. Chairs were piled up on tables, and more cleaning women were swabbing up the mess from a banquet held the previous evening in honor of East German and Soviet computer experts. In the far left corner, a table covered in white damask was set for 20 people, with a fluted Tokar glass at each place. Utz had miscalculated. He had counted on at least a handful of his more venal cousins turning up in case there was anything to be had. He had counted too on a delegation from the museum, if only to arrange the transfer of his porcelains into their grasping hands. As it was, Martin and Orlick sat alone, side by side, ordering smoked ham, cheese pancakes, and wine from the slovenly waiter. At the far end of the table stood a huge stuffed bear, reared on its hind legs, mouth agape, forepaws outstretched, placed there by some humorous person to remind the clientele of their country's fraternal protector. On its plinth, a brass plaque announced that it had been shot by a Bohemian baron, not in the Tatras or Carpathians, but in the Yukon in 1926. The bear was a grizzly. After a glass or two of Tokay, Marta had apparently given up grieving for her dead employer. After 4 glasses, she twisted her mouth into a mocking grin and shouted at the top of her voice, "To the bear! To the bear!"
E aí, gostou dessa leitura? Deixe seus comentários abaixo e curta esse vídeo. Eu vou deixar aqui para vocês uma playlist com outros vídeos do canal e eu espero vocês na próxima leitura. Até mais!